Morning, everybody. It's time to start the meeting of the Regional Development Assessment Panel. I declare the meeting open at 9:32, and in doing so acknowledge that we are hosting the meeting on traditional land of the Whadjuk people, the Noongar Nation, and are joined by people from other lands around the state. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respects to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with the RDAP Standing Orders 2024 under the Planning and Development Assessment Panels Regulations 2011. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the RDAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the Planning and Development Assessment Panels Regulations 2011. Members are reminded to announce their name and title prior to speaking. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. My name is Clayton Hyam and I'm the presiding member for today's meeting. Panel members are Al Page, the deputy presiding member, Karen Hyde, the third specialist member, and online we have councillors Miffling and Italiano from the Shire of Collie. With declarations of due consideration, can I get a show of hands from members if you consider that you have considered all the documentation before you today for the agenda? Show of hands, please. Thank you. Disclosures of interest. I have two disclosures of interest already, one from Councillor Miffling and one from Councillor Italiano. They are impartiality interests and they've been approved to sit and consider this matter. Are there any other disclosures of interest? No. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 3.1, which is the matter before us today, the proposed battery energy storage system and solar PV facility. We have a number of presentations this morning. What I'm going to do is to get the people who are objecting to the proposal to do their presentations, and then we'll go to questions from panel members on a collective basis, because quite often questions overlap and different people may need to answer the question. And then we'll go to the applicants, to them collectively as well. Can I remind you that presentations are 3 minutes only, and I will call you at 3 minutes and ask you to wind up at that point. Noting that we have read all the material, and I urge you to concentrate on the main points you want to make. So first presenter is Sandra Chappell. Sandra, would you like to come? Over to you, Sandra.
Good morning, members of the panel. My name is Sandra Chappell of Lot 773 Collie Williams Road. I'm here today to urge the department to give full and careful consideration to the environmental, safety and financial and social consequences of the proposed solar farm and 200 megawatt lithium battery installation which abuts my eastern boundary. The first is fire risk. My block has a memorial in place, meaning we are prohibited from clearing. Lithium batteries are globally recognised as having a potential for catastrophic fire events, and once ignited, these fires are extraordinarily difficult to control. This site is already classified as bushfire prone. The consequences of such an event would extend well beyond the facility, endangering lives, property, livestock, and the surrounding national park. The department has a responsibility to ask, how will these neighbouring landowners be notified, and how long will we have to evacuate in the case of such a specialised fire? Secondly, the proposal directly borders habitat for the endangered Borden and Carnaby cockatoos. The assessment itself acknowledges that the permanent habitat destruction will occur. Yet the environmental data relied upon is more than a decade old, and it's using outdated methods without any modern surveying techniques. It is not reasonable nor responsible to allow irreversible damage to endangered species on the basis of incomplete or inaccurate information. I believe the department's mandate is to protect ecological linkages, not to erode them. Third, the noise modelling shows residents can expect a constant industrial hum day and night for the next 20 years. As the battery spans the entire east boundary, we are also subjected to light pollution. The viewshed analysis fails to account for the reality that landowners enjoy the entirety of their property, not just a view from a single dwelling. We purchased this property for the rural views, not the view of an industrial facility. Also, the financial implications. The installation of a large industrial facility in a rural landscape will inevitably reduce my land values. More critically, the increased fire risk raises real questions about the ability of residents to secure and maintain property insurance. These are not abstract concerns. They are direct financial consequences for families who have invested in this land. We purchased this land 10 months ago with ecotourism and short farm stay adventures in mind. Our plans will not be financially viable if this facility is approved. Finally, there is the matter of principle. Renewable energy is vital, but it must not come at the cost of environmental degradation, community safety, or social harm.
Thanks, Sandra.
In summary, this development will expose community to unacceptable fire risk, permanently destroyed endangered species habitat, devalue neighbouring properties, erode rural amenity through noise, light and visual pollution, and place residents in financial and insurance vulnerability. I respectfully urge the department to reject this proposal in its current form and require relocation to a more suitable site, one that upholds both the principles of renewable energy and the department's responsibility to protect communities and the environment. Thank you today.
Sandra. Thank you for that. We'll move on to Travis Watson.
Good morning, presiding member and panel members. My name is Travis Watson. I own a rural property near the proposed solar panel and battery energy storage facility on the Collie Road. I purchased my farm in 2018 with one clear intention of building my dream house and one day retiring there. I chose this property for its open rural views, its peaceful character and its location within a landscape that I believed would remain agricultural and residential in nature. The proposed development would fundamentally change that. This is not just about losing a view, it's about losing the very qualities that underpin my investment, my lifestyle and my future retirement. Developments of this scale have shown to reduce surrounding property values, and in practical terms, any price I might receive if I were forced to sell would not allow me to purchase land of a comparable size and quality elsewhere within the Shire. What I stand to lose cannot be replaced. There are also very serious environmental and safety concerns. The site is close to a river and creek system, creating real risks of contamination from runoff, leaching from or firefighting water in the event of an incident. There is also only one access road into my property, and that road passes directly through the middle of the solar farm. If a fire occurred, especially involving battery storage, which produces toxic fumes, that road would become impassable. In such circumstances, how am I supposed to evacuate safely? Beyond these personal and safety impacts, the proposal does not align with the planning frameworks. The Shire of Collie Local Planning Scheme number 6 seeks to protect rural land from incompatible industrial uses. State Planning Policy 2.5, rural planning emphasizes preserving rural character and preventing inappropriate industrial encroachment. The position statement on renewable energy facilities supports renewable projects, but only where adverse impacts on landholders, amenity and the environment are minimised. This proposal in this location does not meet these tests. I want to be clear, I'm not against renewable energy. I'm against poor site selection that places a burden visually, financially and environmentally and in terms of safety on the neighbouring residents. For these reasons, I respectfully urge the panel to refuse this application. At the very least, I ask you require significant relocation or redesign to ensure the safety of residents, the protection of the environment and the preservation of the rural amenity that is central to our community. Thank you.
Travis. Move on to Aaron Lohman.
I just take the delayed.
Thank you, presiding members and members of the DAP today for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to talk to you about three separate matters today: development impact scheme objectives and noise. The proposal will adversely impact on our clients' landholding and amenity for the following reasons. The solar PV arrays would largely impact views on the surrounding rural landscape from the unnamed road. Rural amenity enjoyed by entering lot 789 would no longer be exempt post-development. Now, in terms of the unnamed road, a photo of it here, which is not going to come up. There we go. So that is taken from the unnamed road. It is a road reserve. There will be solar PV arrays on either side of that as our client traverses to his site, which is his only access. The PV solar arrays along the southern boundary will significantly impact on rural character landscape vistas and currently enjoyed. The applicant's letter of 24th of July says that landscaping can ameliorate visual impacts along the southern boundary, and there's been some additional information and photo montages submitted to substantiate the landscaping. Essentially, the landscaping would defeat the purpose of our client's preference for that site, because the 6 metre high landscaping would obscure the views and amenity that was selected for that site. The photo montages also demonstrate that there will be a sea of PV arrays that will change the landscape significantly. Neither the responsible authority or the application appear to address the objectives of the rural zone that provide for maintenance or enhancement of specific rural character and enhancing the environmental quality of the landscape. In terms of these objectives, it would be difficult to reasonably justify that the proposal enhances or maintains rural character and the environmental quality of the landscape. And this is because of the significant change to the facilities that introduce. The objectives are very specific, and the industrial nature of 83.38 hectares of solar array and BESS facility, in our view, cannot meet these objectives. I'd also like to point out there is, throughout the development application, a development avoidance area specified. In my view, that perhaps is not accurate based on the plans. It does seem to include a portion of the unnamed road reserve, which we have been talking about, and it also seems to include that area in a management area associated with the facility. This may need to be clarified. It still remains unclear to us with the acoustic assessment whether the cumulative effect of surrounding noise, including the BESS facility that is under construction and established on the south side of Collie Road, has been considered. I'd also draw the DAP's attention to scenario 1 as set out in excuse me, 11 of the acoustic assessment.
3 minutes, thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. I will do. Just to cover off on noise, there's no condition that secures the noise, management measures specified in the acoustic assessment. I would close by saying there is a number of objections against the proposal. These are basically all the landowners west of Bingham River, adjacent to the proposal, and our clients on the north. I would suggest that given the council resolution and the objections of the landowners, these are substantive matters, and perhaps a social licence doesn't exist to allow for the facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. On to Tim Howling.
Thank you, Presiding Member, and I act for Travis Watson, who's opposed, who you heard from him previously. I'm not intending to recover what he's already said. These facilities are very important because the question is, where should they best be located? There is 500 hectares of industrial land in and around Collie where these sorts of facilities should be located. As the power station is slated to be closed down in 2027, in about 2 years' time, and renewable energy is going to be becoming of increasing importance where it's going to be located, it's important that a precedent is not set, albeit the fact that each proposal needs to be considered on its merits. I want to address a matter that hasn't been talked about so far, and that is risk. Now, risk is a relevant planning consideration, as is included within the regulations in 67, both Q as well as R. Now, those matters of risk, we need to bear in mind that there were 1,000 lithium battery fires in the last year, approximately. That's reported in the newspaper, and I expect and rather suggest that it would be true. Now, there has also been significant fires over, and that's this newspaper article here. There's also been significant fires in the eastern seaboard, and the fires have been of such a nature, and 5 fires over the last 2 years, caused by lithium batteries exploding. And I can show you the articles, and what they produced and do produce is thick, toxic, black smoke. This is not put out by a 50,000 litre water tank. These fires need foam suppressant. And there is no method by which the state government has funded the Shire of Collie or funded the local firefighting volunteers to ensure that they're able to put out these fires. In fact, the published information, which is out of the United Kingdom, speaks about the risks that are presented. Warning from the fire officials highlight the significant risks related to fire safety and the health risks. Now, the Australian PV Institute says, don't worry, the lead and cadmium smoke that it produces is unlikely to cause you cancer if you're not exposed to it for extended periods, which is great news. But it's not all that good news if you're living right next to a lithium power bank and all of a sudden it creates fire. This has not been properly addressed. When you look at all of the newspaper articles that are readily available online about fires, Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales, you can readily appreciate that there is a risk that properly hasn't been mitigated. But not only that, the problem we have is there's no strategic direction contained within any of the planning instruments, either set by the state government, even the local government, because this local government has been caught a little bit unawares because it was only about 18 months ago where they spoke about closing down the Collie power station. Now, when they close down the Collie power station, the people want to have agricultural land on which they can be located. And I say that the risk has not been properly assessed. It hasn't been properly taken into account in addition to the amenity concerns. It's a very short period. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, because we go to questions now from panel members for any of the previous presenters, including yourself. So, councillors online there, do you have any questions?
This is Ian Miffling, not at this stage, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes.
Thank you. This is one for Aaron. Aaron, I think you mentioned concerns that was the no management or reference to noise management. What are your comments regarding condition 13, which requires a noise monitoring program and demonstrated compliance?
Sure.
The EPA regulations, noise regulations, and goes on to detail what is required in that consideration.
Yes, so the point I was making in terms of the acoustic assessment, in terms of our client site, it would be included in the scenario one area where it would exceed the noise regs on Sundays and public holidays. In my view, although a residence wasn't specifically assessed on our content, it's obviously
there. Condition 13 of itself, yes, it does talk about a noise monitoring program within the first months to demonstrate compliance with the noise regs. The conclusions at part 5 of that acoustic report specify measures that need to be achieved to comply with the noise regulations. The point that I was trying to make is those are specified in the acoustic report, but there's no condition recommended in the RAR that secures that compliance. So the noise monitoring will look at the noise that is actually generated, but there's no physical restriction in the recommendation for the plant to operate at those specific noise levels. And it's about fan reduction speeds and the like matters.
Questions?
Sorry, just a couple, thank you. And probably just picking up on, and I'm not sure if this will be Mr. Watson or Aaron, if you want to answer, and it's picking up from the submissions that you made in relation to particularly the visual impact on Mr. Watson's property. So the submission that you made, Aaron, seems to indicate that the PVs would largely impact views from the road, and they certainly, as we saw, would be visible from the southern boundary of the site. And we've had a look at the photo montages provided that show the impact on the views with and without screening. I wouldn't mind you commenting on how the views will be impacted from elsewhere on the property, and in that response, if you could deal with the fact that it appears you've now identified a preferred location for the dwelling, and it looks like the applicant is seeking to tailor the landscaping to protect future views from that proposed dwelling. Would you comment on that for me, please?
In general, with the other views from the site.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So in our, I have visited the site, obviously, and had a look at it. Depending on where you are is going to depend how much you can view the site. So all along the southern boundary, the topography with the adjoining land is relatively consistent, as you can see from the contour. So if you're traversing along that southern boundary, and if you're going back in from that southern boundary, there's that view shed. And I did have a picture up previously, which was showing a little step back from the boundary, how you could see through the trees to where the solar PVs will be. So you do go back a certain distance and you can still see through the canopy of those trees, because they're high trees, and you still have glimpses. Where there's no trees, you can obviously see straight through. So it's a bit difficult to describe without having the plan in front of me, but essentially you've got that plane at the end that you can see. Where it dips over, and it shows in the visual assessment, which I think the applicant is suggesting you could put a site, there's essentially an area behind the hill and down in the valley, which looks towards the Bingham River, where you could put a dwelling and you would not see. So the choice for our applicant, for the client, is in terms of establishing a home, is either his preferred site and it gets screened, which defeats the purpose. You're in that valley, which you would see nothing, or you can select some other sites. Now, the rationale for not selecting those other sites is in the northeast corner. You would be able to see distant views of the facility. The rationale why our client doesn't want to go there is it's adjacent to the state forest, so the bushfire risk is significantly greater. There's interesting activities on occasions occur in the state forest as well, so there's a reason to be away from that. And then there's the other side, the Bingham River, and there's a photograph in our submission again there where you can see basically alongside the Bingham River pointing towards the south. That if you situated a house on that lower side, you'd still be able to see the facility as well. But there is definitely a patch behind the hill, just because the topography that would obscure in total views. But essentially, the application is almost saying or dictating where you can have a house. But then again, it's also not necessarily restricted, as Dan was raising one of the submissions that I didn't get the time to cover it today, it's the enjoyment of the property in general. It's not just the views that you have from the house. It's you buy in that rural landscape. You want to enjoy the rural vista amenity. It's quiet and peaceful. It's not just being inside a house looking out a window at a solar farm. It's the collective experience on the land.
Thank you. And I have another question. I'm not sure if this is one for you or Mr. Howling, but you did include it in your submission. You used overdevelopment and incompatibility with rural amenity as reasons to refuse the proposal. And I'm just like you to expand briefly for me on why you think it's overdevelopment. There was a comment here about perhaps it should be redesigned. So I'm kind of keen in that context for you to explain what you mean by overdevelopment.
I'll let the planner go first and then I'll sweep up.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah, sure. Look, in the context of overdevelopment, I bring it back to the objectives about maintaining and enhancing the rural landscape and amenity. Quite clearly, in our view, 83 hectares of development in solar arrays is a substantial area. And I know there's some qualifying about in the report, the applicant's report, how there's substantial areas of undeveloped land. And again, I'd make the point that it appears that an unmade road reserve has been included in that calculation, but putting that to a side, I think the photo montages that have been prepared, which look from the boundary of our clients, probably demonstrate that there's significant area development and significant change. Land holdings of themselves are super large in terms of an agricultural perspective, and I know there's been other examples cited within the applicant's submission. Look, in terms of those examples, I would ask to consider those in terms of the site specifics. The wheat belt is a completely different area to the Collie. There's large land holdings, broadacre wheat belt subdivision, massive lots out there. This is more of an entitling enclosed space of hilly terrain. And if you look at the jurisdictional requirements in New South Wales and Victoria, they talk about, in general, avoiding sites with topographic constraints where it makes the solar facilities more visually available in the landscape. And there's also the question of co-location. Yes, we all understand why co-location in respect to connection to existing facilities is appropriate, but there's also the cumulative effects of that, having the best facility over the road, having this facility, and is there going to be something else that may well follow? The greater the area, the more impacts that it has on the visual landscape.
Further questions?
I'd just like a follow-up, if you don't mind. I guess, and I just want to explore that, unless it's in an industrial estate, on industrial zoned land, and a lot of these, not just in Collie, but statewide, we're seeing a few of them are popping up on rural land, and the applicant has pointed out in their submission that there are some good reasons for that. It's the zone in which there's large tracts of land, access to sunlight, the ability to co-locate with agricultural uses, and the preservation of strategic industrial land for intensive industrial purposes. So those reasons have been given as to why these things are locating on rural land, and they are being located on rural land quite commonly. So if this is overdevelopment on this site, could you comment on whether that speaks to, because that would then arguably be overdevelopment on any rural site, could you comment on why that speaks to a compatibility with the zone? I mean, obviously it's something to be considered in this zone, but if it's overdevelopment of this site, wouldn't it be overdevelopment on any rural zoned lot?
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, we're at a bit of a I'm going to call it a regulatory void in terms of solar arrays and renewable energy facilities. The examples that I provided you with the guidelines from New South Wales and Victoria are significantly more advanced. But I did raise the point in our submission, yes, whilst the application could comply with setbacks and alike, which are the current standards in the rural zone, I don't think they were ever intended to apply to a solar farm facility. And I think in saying that, you look at it, the use class, it's an A use. So it's a discretionary use subject to approval. So it's about whether the site is appropriate. And in terms of the appropriate of the site in this instance, I think the visual amenity impacts and the tighter subdivision in that locality as compared to broader locations in the wheat belt or alike, where there's larger land holdings, the impact is significantly greater. And therefore, it would be overdevelopment in this instance.
Can I just, I indicated that I was just going to make some brief comments, if I may. I think it's recognised that rural land could be used for any use. Now, the question is, what is compatible with in the location, having regard to the purpose of the zone, which is described within the scheme. And we say that in that regard, it's maintaining or enhancing the local rural character. And as observed by others and certainly by ourselves, this is more of a character of industrial type use. It doesn't fit neatly within the definition of rural contained within the scheme. That's the first issue. The second is that there's simply no strategic documents that justify the use of the rural zone for this purpose. That is clear and direct and on point. In New South Wales, they've certainly adopted strategic documents and frameworks which identify suitable locations. And so when you identify the extent of the use of that particular rural piece of land for this purpose, whether you are flying over the top or whether you're standing on the ground, you look over and it's the extent of the land that is the rural land. And now we need to bear in mind, if I may just very quickly point out, that there's actually not a lot of rural land around Collie. Actually, it's fairly limited, but the provision of industrial land is significant, both in the local planning strategy as well as in the scheme itself, and that's recognised. So when I say 500 hectares, I've drawn on what is stated within the local planning strategy as the extent of the land. And so you may expect that somebody hard stands the whole of the industrial area. You may expect clearing of an industrial parcel of land. All of these expectations are not what you would expect of a PV facility. And one last point that I would just wish to raise, there's interesting development work which is going on internationally when they have had to attend these fires, and then they've identified that their facilities, that's their firefighting trucks and materials, can't turn around. They haven't properly provided for it, and they haven't properly taken into account the risk, and it takes days to put out these fires because the fires get in underneath the PV facilities after having been started by the lithium batteries. So there's work to be done. We don't have the strategic framework, and that's why I'm impressing the precautionary principle, which is a relevant principle. I can cite the case for you. That needs properly to be taken into account when considering where should this be located. And in the absence of those strategic plans and documents and policy frameworks, we say the precautionary principle should apply. Clear-felled those areas within the industrial area, which isn't going to impact on amenity and which is a discretionary use as opposed to where it's proposed, which is an A use. Sorry, hopefully that's...
Thank you for that. So just one very last follow-up on that. And to understand if we're saying, and if this panel made a decision on the basis that we don't think this is appropriate for the rural zone based on what you have just said, what does that mean for other developments across the state where there may be much needed rural land is the option or the only option for them? We're not the SAT, so we're not setting precedent, but I'm kind of curious if those are the points you're making and we take those on board and make our decision based on those points. What does that mean for decision making on other similar proposals across the state, where they may not have a shots at stake?
Yes, and can I start first by saying that's a really great question, because one of the things that, and to put the elephant right out in the front, that everybody will be thinking is, how do we ensure that there are areas that can accommodate renewable energy? And Mr. Watson said, I'm not against renewable energy. I don't think anybody is, but it's about where it's properly to be located. And in the absence of the state government taking the leadership, and it's great to say a few years ago, we're going to close down Collie. The people that have been living there and been servicing the Collie power station have now looked to rural activity surrounding the town site, and the Shire has been keen to enhance what rural activities can be carried on. The bed and breakfast, a viable agricultural use, all of those sorts of uses, which are typical of rural. What I would be concerned about is if in the back of our minds, and it's tempting for, I think, all of us to think, well, we're trying to accommodate the intent of providing more solar electricity generation within the state. And therefore, we will see this as a need to push it on the rural environment where there's been no careful public consultation, which is important, where there's been no careful discussion with the community, no time for the local government to put up its own local planning policies. So it's really unfortunate that we're effectively asking the DAP to try to make these decisions in an absolute void because there is no strategic direction that is properly taking into account the impact. So this decision needs to be made on the basis of this scheme and these strategic documents. And we just say there's nothing here. We say also that, yes, there's a problem across the whole state when we're talking about this because there's just a great idea. Let's go for solar. That's fantastic, but nothing to back it up. No firefighting facilities, no training for the local fire brigades who expressed views. One of those volunteers expressed views about being worried about fire. No suppressant. A 50,000 litre water tank is about the extent of it. And so we say that that's just not sufficient.
Thank you.
And so that's what we're getting at.
Thank you, Mr. Howling.
Sorry for carrying on.
All right. Further questions? No. Mr. Howling, you mentioned 1,000 fires. Are they all of this sort of facility or are there some scooters? And
It must be clear, that's 1,000 lithium battery fires. So that is right across. When I looked at the detail of where the
how many would be of this type of facility?
Of this type of facility, there was about 5 in the last year. That was readily available. I did list them when I went to Collie. Unfortunately, I haven't taken a list with me now, but there is 5 separate locations where those fires have taken place in rural Victoria, and they are as a result of PV.
You did mention that our job is to deal with the scheme as it is now, the application we've got before us, even though it lacks that strategic overview. You can't be suggesting that we just ignore the fact that it's an A use.
No.
And that we need to consider it as an A use within the scheme.
It's not an X use, so I really accept that. So it's able to be, because that's what the decision makers decided. But we've got to look at it in light of the extent of the development on the site, edge to edge, and now we're going to plant a few bushes, further problems of fire. So yes, absolutely. But all of these other factors which are contained in Regulation 67, as well as the purpose of the rural zone, have to be taken into account when considering whether or not that ought to be approved, because we've left no other strategic framework. And so we have to come back to core principles, orderly and proper planning, rural purposes, and those are judgment matters. I readily accept that. But we say that in light of the absence of proper strategic frameworks, without having proper policies, without the community being fully involved and engaged in identifying where these solar farms should be located, without the proper setbacks, rather than edge to edge, without thinking about the risks, the community again in Collie is being asked to bear the burden of the needs of Perth.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for a long-winded answer.
Further questions of the presenters? No. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on then to first one is Lynn Lee. Don't forget 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, presiding member, and thank you, DAP members, for the opportunity to present today. My name is Lynn Lee and I represent the proponent Empowered. In addition to the team presenting deputations this morning, I brought a project available in the room or online for questions that the members may have, including questions related to risk mitigations incorporated in the design and siting of the facility. By way of background, Empowered is developing this project as a renewable energy platform of Hesperia. Hesperia is a WA-owned developer and manager of sustainable projects with over $3 billion in developments completed or in progress. For context, the state is committed to a 2030 emissions reduction of 8% below 2020 levels, and our project will contribute to the energy transition in Western Australia by filling the capacity shortfall projected by the Australian energy market operator. The shortfall is driven by the forecast closures of ageing state and privately owned coal-fired generation. Our project is aligned with both the state and local Shire strategy for Collie. One, the state's Collie Just Transition Plan identifies a need for economic diversification as part of coal retirements. And two, the Shire of Collie's 2020 local planning strategy identifies renewable energy, particularly solar, as one of the potential areas of diversification, which the Shire enabled through various enacting actions, including the inclusion of renewable energy facility, such as ours, as a discretionary use in the rural zone. As you've read, our proposal is for a facility comprising of up to 66 megawatts of solar PV and 200 megawatts of battery energy storage system, along with supporting infrastructure to connect to the new Western Power Palmer terminal currently under construction. Our project will provide the opportunity for competitively priced clean energy, opportunities for local employment, upskilling, and the supply of local content to the project, and a community benefit fund that will share benefits generated by the project to the Collie community, and we look forward to engaging with the community further on this. We note we've recently commented in favour of the state government's draft community benefits for renewable energy projects consultation paper. We are development ready. We're on schedule to meet our target operating date of October 2028. We're 24 months into the Western Power connection process. Western Power has presented us with a letter of status indicating we are on track for energisation of our facility in early 2028. Furthermore, Western Power has designated our project as connection ready due to the available capacity at Palmer Terminal, allowing our project to connect quickly. And finally, we've obtained market participant status with the Australian energy market operator to enable participation in the WA wholesale electricity market. The site for our proposal has been selected due to its proximity to the Western Power Palmer Terminal and its available capacity, the relatively cleared nature of the site with only pockets of remnant vegetation, meaning minimal environmental impact, and consistency with other power generation and transmission infrastructure within a 5-kilometre radius, such as Collie and Blue Waters power stations, the new Neowen and Synergy Collie Besses, and the Coolangatta industrial area.
3 minutes, thank you.
Sheep grazing will continue on the site throughout operations, preserving its agricultural roots. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you. On to Aaron Wright.
Thank you, presiding member. I'm just going to get Freda to run the PowerPoint just so that we can stick to the 3 minutes, if that's okay. Okay, so thank you. Thanks, presiding member, for the opportunity to present. Since lodgement of the development application, we've worked with the Shire of Collie officers to address feedback received from the stakeholder and community submissions, and we wish to more specifically address those matters in our presentation. The proposed development is aligned to the state government and local government strategies, which you've heard some reference to this morning, and this includes Collie's Just Transition Plan. An action of the Collie local planning strategy in 2020 was to introduce renewable energy facility as a discretionary land use in the rural zone, and importantly, the Shire amended its scheme as recent as 2023 to introduce renewable energy facility as an use in the rural zone. Both of these documents were advertised for public comment, and at the conclusion of that, the renewable energy land use was included as an use in the rural zone. The land use proposed today is consistent with that definition of renewable energy facility. It's an use in the rural zone, which means it can receive development approval subject to public consultation occurring. In terms of the consistency with the rural zone, we've heard some suggestions that the development is inconsistent. We contend that the development is actually consistent with the objectives of the rural zone. And I'll just point out a couple, and they're not in any particular order or priority, but the development has been carefully designed to balance Collie's transition whilst integrating with and preserving the rural landscape, so maintaining rural character. It co-locates energy infrastructure with existing grazing activities on the land, thereby protecting agricultural activities. And the technical reports confirm any impacts on surrounding environment can be appropriately managed, and where appropriate, these are addressed in the conditions of approval, thereby maintaining environmental qualities on the site. As has been discussed, there was some suggestion that the development would be better located in the Coolangatta industrial estate. We've sought advice from development from Deed, and they've advised that with a limited supply of available land in the Collie industrial estate, the focus of Deed is to utilise that land for major job creating activities and not for solar PV. And in fact, deed continues in relation to that strategic framework that we're all seeking from government. Deed continues that we understand that DPLH is drafting renewable energy planning code, and through this work considers solar battery storage infrastructure to be compatible with the land use. In terms of compliance with the planning framework, in addition to being consistent with the objectives of the scheme, the proposal has been designed to meet the requirements of the local planning framework and the scheme. As mentioned in the Lavin submission, there is nothing else contained in the scheme that would prohibit the establishment of the proposed development on the subject site. We are seeking a minor variation to condition number 2, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have in relation to that. In relation to the notion of overdevelopment on the site, the development footprint comprises 83 hectares. Their footprint is actually less than 50% of the overall development application of the site area, if you just consider the land on the northern side of Collie Williams Road, or 38% of the total development application
3 minutes,
area.
Ms. Karen.
So in our view, it's consistent with the rural zone, and I'll now hand over to Kirsten Knox, who will be able to go into some more site-specific minutes. Thank you very much.
Kirsten Knox from Emerge Associates, Principal Environmental Consultant, and we've done the visual impact assessment work. With the visual impact, it's been considered in accordance with the Visual Landscape Planning Manual in WA, which is the key guiding document for how we undertake this work. It's included landscape evaluation, viewshed analysis, which is only topography, so can look more than what it is, and then and simulation, and we've done it for the existing receptors that were identified along the way. The characteristics of the proposal assist with screening and blending to nearby residents and Collie Williams Road. It's the undulating landform and the sporadic vegetation. We have done additional visual impact work in response to submissions during the public consultation period, which I'll briefly touch on. And we support the proponent supports the proposed landscaping plan condition, which provides for additional mitigation. This slide just recaps on key features. So the yellow arrows kind of represent where there's vegetation or landform that's helping block or blend views. The brighter blue arrow is the more open view from Collie Williams Road, and then the darker arrow at the top is representative of glimpses. So it's just kind of trying to summarise key visual areas. For lot 771, which was one of the submitters during the consultation, they will have glimpses. The photo on the right is sort of from their backyard when the proponent was visiting landowners, and shows the paddocks and things in the far distance, and the panels will sit below the vegetation. It wouldn't significantly change the views of that from that property because of all the veg. So said no further mitigation for lot 774, the existing residence, which is similar to what Sandra had said in the sense of the current residents. They're surrounded by vegetation, so they're fully screened, and that's what is considered, not the full land holding. And then with lot 789, which we've heard about, there's no residents currently, so they hadn't been full consideration, but the additional work kind of shows from topography, which Aaron touched on as well, that there is parts of the lot that have a greater visual impact than not, and the southern portion does. And some additional work was done to demonstrate or show what screening would look like and how that could block the views of the panels. And that's all I think.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Member, good morning. My name is Jason Hick, our Principal Environmental Consultant at Emerge Associates. Emerge Associates have progressed a range of investigations and supported the application across environment and bushfire, and really just wanted to talk to some of the key considerations that have been factored into the application and the recommendations in the RAR to you today. Now, more broadly, starting with the ecological considerations and baseline surveys, there's been extensive and detailed baseline ecological surveys across the site, which have resulted in avoidance areas where there is not proposed development, primarily on the basis of avoiding ecological values, but also avoiding clearing in a rural landscape. So the broad survey work has been factored into the layout. But going into probably three considerations that are more relevant in terms of submissions, and just wanted to talk to specifically in relation to noise and noise considerations. Now, the most specific consideration there is the need to comply with the environmental protection noise regulations, regardless of any planning approval or application. Now, what the response has been that's been factored into the proposal is an operational regime that can demonstrate compliance with the noise regulations. Now, that's both through citing of noise sources, but also an operational regime, which is not unlike any sort of operation, to ensure that through both day and night time assigned levels, full compliance with the noise regulations could be achieved. And as referenced before, there's a recommended condition that would then be critical to demonstrating that compliance through 12 months of ongoing monitoring and adjustment, should that be required to comply with the noise regulations. In terms of bushfire risk, now key consideration is both the risk in the landscape to the facility of bushfire, but also the risk of the facility back to its surrounding context. Now, the key parts of the proposal response have been, now only part of the site is identified as being bushfire prone. However, that triggers the planning policy framework and the need to consider bushfire risk. There's been strategic siting, particularly of the BESS, to not exceed BAL 12.5, and also the solar PV to not exceed BAL 29. Now, that's a voluntary, that's not a specific requirement of the guidelines, but has been factored into the proposal. The whole site will be subject to ongoing fuel load management, not only ongoing rural agricultural uses, but grassland management to ensure that the whole site is low threat. The design of the BESS
3 minutes.
Also will enable controlled burnout. There's a dedicated water supply and emergency access provided fully within the site. And lastly, in terms of lighting, there is an Australian standard in relation to lighting and outdoor lighting. Now, the proposal response has considered there will be a need for some nighttime lighting, specifically designed to lower the potential for light spill. No ongoing requirement for floodlights in lesser case of emergency response, and there is a recommended condition to require compliance with the Australian standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Move on to Greg Wallace, please.
You don't have to hear from me.
Just a written submission.
Sorry, just a written submission from Mr. Wallace. Okay, thank you. And there was also a written submission from Phil Anastasakis, CEO of the Shire of Collie, anyway. Sorry if I've mispronounced that name terribly. We'll go to questions now of the presenters. I'll start with the councillors online. Are there any questions of the last four presenters?
Yes, Ian Miffling, Shire of Collie. I'd just like to ask a question of Mr. Lee, please, about, he mentioned the economic enhancement for this project, and I'd like to get a little bit of an enhancement itself on what he means by the economic enhancement, because from what I can see and from what I've read in the submission, there may be between 0 to 5 people in some sort of employment, and I would assume probably in Perth or somewhere as a online monitoring. There would be a construction phase, which may or may not involve local people in that. But I cannot see, once this proposal was built, what the enhancement for the economy of Collie would be. I'd like some more information, please.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. In relation to the economic enhancement, I certainly acknowledge that there will be 100 temporary construction jobs. There will be opportunity to provide apprenticeships and the like to some of those individuals that may will equip them with long-lasting skills and qualification beyond the construction period. I also acknowledge that the number of jobs for these sorts of renewable energy facilities range in the order of 2 to 5 ongoing. My comment around economic diversification really is indirect in relation to the supply of energy to other developers developing industrial projects within the Collie region. We are in commercial and confidence discussions around renewable energy supply to certain people developing projects in the Collie region, and the security of low cost renewable energy is highly valued by these developers. And I think, in respect of, that's critical to getting those projects off the ground in the long run.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Yes, Councillor Italiano.
Thank you, Chair. My question would be to Karen Wright, if I could. During Karen's presentation, she mentioned the Coolangatta estate and that the potential was investigated there. My question is, did you look at any other industrial sites around Collie in addition to Coolangatta estate? And possibly the one that comes to mind here is the Shots Industrial Park. Was that considered as part of this evaluation?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so overall, we did focus more so on Coolangatta, as that was specifically mentioned, but the general notion in terms of the location in industrial land, the same principles would apply. So in terms of Coolangatta or Shots, the principles would be that the state is looking at those areas as being drivers of economic and employment activity.
Thank you. Further questions, councillors? Okay, questions from the floor here? Yes.
Yes, please. And I'm not sure who will pick them up, but in terms of a comment made about nighttime lighting, why is there a need for nighttime lighting of a facility like this?
I'd invite Ashwin Maharaj from Mont McDonald to speak on the point. Ashwin.
Thanks. Thank you. So the requirement for nighttime lighting is driven by the Australian standard, which is mentioned by our presenter earlier on, which requires that operational areas within the facility have adequate lighting at night for operational purposes, for inspections and so on. Operational locations within the site are areas where someone would need to maybe monitor or take measurements or do visual inspections. That would largely be at the best inverter locations, which is scattered across the site, as well as in the high voltage substation on the site itself.
Could you speak to just the relatively low nature of the lighting in that area and the amount of luminal lux?
So typically for the operational areas, the Australian standard nominates provisionally between 10 and 15 lux at operational areas. So that means that at those areas you need about 10 or 15 lux. In general, walkways and roadways and the like, that could range between 2 and 5 lux, which is a fairly minimal amount of light spill. But to that point as well is the engineering design takes into account the height of these lights to ensure that the spillage across or outside the facility is minimized. So that would limit the height of the lighting masts to below 4 meters and as low as it can go to only supply light for the operational areas. Floodlights are much higher, but the indication is that floodlights at night would only be used as necessary, particularly in the potential of an emergency situation that you may switch them on, and you would not have them on a daily basis as compared to the operational lights.
Okay, so just on that, am I right to assume that there's not lighting across the whole of this facility and that the lighting is directed for the specific purpose of each component? I'm trying to get an idea about whether or not we've got this whole lit thing at night or whether there's bits that are lit differently. And it seems you've confirmed that, but can you just?
Yes, that is correct. Your assumption is correct. So operational areas across the site would be limited to the inverters on the site. Across the solar facility, those are very minimal and quite widely spread. Within the battery facility, there are lots of these inverters, but fairly well distributed. So the light, when I speak about lighting generally, and operational lighting, you'd expect that to occur in the BESS facility and the high voltage facility, not so much in the solar part of the facility.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to talk about fire for a minute, and Mr. Howling gave us some statistics about large lithium battery facilities and catastrophic fire events, and the concern that there would be a consequent increase in fire risk over what might exist if there was another rural land use on this site. I'd like somebody just to comment on that.
I'd invite Ashwin to speak to the fire risk mitigations within the design of the facility. Jason, you may wish to add on in relation to the site.
And I wouldn't mind the commentary to focus on facilities like this, not general lithium across the board. I'm trying to understand what the risk would be, the increased risk would be of a facility like this.
You have to talk to the risk mitigations in place.
Yes. So in terms of fire and the source of fire, I might just start by talking about the source of the fire and the fuel. So in the PV part of the facility, the source of the fire is from the PV, the electrical portion of it. The design considers electrical protection to prevent fires starting or spreading. And so in the PV portion of the facility, fire risk is fairly low, much like a PV that we would have on our rooftops. So well understood and well protected. In terms of the BESS facility and the high voltage facility, slightly different to the solar PV in terms of the fuel source. Also, so should I say the fuel? The source of the fire is the electricity and the energy, the electrical energy. So with the PV, with the batteries, the fuel in the battery is the electrical energy. The design, and this is sort of nominated in Australian standards, takes into consideration various passive controls, main one being spacing between battery cells and the battery PCS, that adequate fire spacing is maintained. This is across the all battery cells and the inverters.
Just to help you out there, so this is the battery, the spacing of the battery modules, each of the containerized modules, as well as the cells within the modules.
That's correct. So spacing of the battery containerized modules to other modules and to the inverter. And the reason for that is that if a battery fire occurs, the source of the fuel is the electrical energy, which needs to be extinguished. So the energy needs to be completely extinguished. And in terms of fire management, it's about making sure that the fire does not spread from one battery module to anything else. So it needs to be contained within that battery module. And that's the fundamental thinking about fire management and controlling of the fire. If a fire occurs and if we do deploy active systems like fire suppression and foam systems and so on, or firefighting with the use of water, the drainage systems are designed to collect this water in an evaporation pond outside the facility so that it does not leach into the surrounding grounds. And that's standard design and based on Australian standards. So you'll find various forms of this fire protection across all batteries across Australia. With the power transformer in the high voltage facility, the fuel there is the oil in the power transformer. The source is the electrical energy. Again, various passive systems in terms of the design are applied. Things like bunding around transformers, firewalls, and so on to make sure that if fire occurs, it does not spread. But similar principle to the battery is that if water is used or foam, that the drainage drains this polluted water into the evaporation pond. So those are the key aspects of design basically embedded into the facility in terms of prevention of fire, and then management of fire, and then what happens if a fire occurs, and how the fire is extinguished and how the pollutants are collected outside the site.
Just before I bring in Jason or Anthony on the bushfire risk element, I might also just talk about ember attack from the facility. We've had this discussion.
We're battling to hear you because you're not.
Oh, sorry. I might just invite Ashman to comment also on the risk of ember attack if a fire was to emanate from our facility. Can you just touch on that before I bring in Anthony?
Yes. So in terms of an ember attack, because of the fuel source and the type of materials used in the manufacture of these electrical devices like power transformers or batteries or PCSs, you're looking at various chemicals like the and the lithium, things like copper, plastic, steel, and so on. If a fire were to occur, these are electrical fires. The way these occur is you would have generally be you'll have arcing or sparking and that sort of fire with black smoke, but they are not the type of fire does not generate and the reason is because the fuel is not susceptible to generating of embers like you would get in a bushfire based on the material on the fuel. So ember attack from fire in these facilities is not expected.
Anthony, you guys comment on the bushfire risk?
Thank you. I guess there's two aspects from the point of view of bushfire. There's a fire actually arriving at the site and what that might do, and then there's the potential for fire to escape from the site. Most of that's addressed by the fact we've got separations around the development. So there's no direct flame contact that's actually possible to any of the assets that are actually in the site. So the point about embers is actually really relevant because it will be embers actually traversing the distance, and embers can go 500 metres, so they can actually travel a long way. The best way to deal with that is actually the site management. So the main risk would be grass actually underneath the solar panels. So it will be a matter of heat coming underneath the solar panel and then perhaps breaching some of the other protections in terms of the insulators. So the way you address the bushfire risk really for this site is firstly the separation, so we're outside of flame length, but then it's the site management itself to make sure that if you get ember attack, you don't actually get a grass fire underneath the panels, which might actually ignite vulnerable materials in the panels. So that's not a problem. Look, I am aware that some of the large storage battery systems have ignited around Australia. The frequency of that likelihood, we think there's under-reporting in the industry, but even at that point, it is still expected to be less than agricultural production. So if you look at the bushfire risk management plan for Collie, about 70% of fires are actually caused by deliberate or not reported, so people not fessing up. Agricultural fires are about 5%. Natural fires are about 10%. So we're looking at a fairly small percentage in terms of the ignition rate in Collie. Most of it is human activity. With regard to solar farms and large storage facilities, it's somewhere less than agricultural production. We don't know the precise number. I would point out that the fires that have occurred, the protection systems have been successful. The battery has actually been contained to the fire itself. I'm not aware of any fire in a large battery storage system which has got into the panels and then caused a spread across the panels. The other thing is the fire in the panels will actually move slower than a grass fire. So the grass underneath the panels is actually the risk. So a grass will move fast underneath the panels, but a fire in the panels themselves actually moves quite slowly.
Before we leave the fire, might I just ask about evacuation? Because one of the earlier presenters talked about accessing their lot via, I presume, some sort of agreement, but a shared access way. How is that dealt with in terms of bushfire management? I don't know if it's you or Jason, but how is that dealt with?
The main expectations of fire actually coming from outside, which might actually breach that access. So that wouldn't be unique to this particular facility.
And if, and there are lots of ifs in all of this, but if it were to do with the PV panels, how would evacuation take place in that context?
In most cases, the evacuation is likely to occur, but the expectation would be containment within the site in terms of a fire in the panels themselves. Plus, we've got the separation, so it shouldn't actually breach. The panels themselves aren't noted for giving off a high level of embers attack. So when they burn, they tend not to put a lot of material into the air. The battery storage facility is slightly different. So the method with the battery itself is to let that actually burn out to actually expend its energy. There are materials that you can actually apply, but whether, and the question was asked, will the local facility have those materials on hand? It's probably unlikely. The most likely strategy is that it will be allowed to burn out. The prevailing wind directions in the location actually take smoke away from the township of Collie. So we'd expect that if it was allowed to actually burn out, the smoke would actually blow away from Collie. But the system, if you like, lives within a family of other risks that are in Collie, and you have a local emergency management agreement, and basically you pre-plan what an incident might be. This facility would be identified as a risk for an immediate response. Has a high economic value, notwithstanding the employment numbers, but it does have a high economic number. It will be given status because of that in terms of its firefighting prominence. If it is the case that it was a large battery fire, the considerations will be the wind direction and whether you need to evacuate anyone downstream. That decision will be made by the incident controller as part of a normal process.
Right, thank you.
Just to follow up, why, if we know that the smoke coming out of a battery fire is good for human consumption, why wouldn't we use a suppressant to douse the fire rather than just let it burn out and let the smoke keep going?
You need an encapsulating material to actually do that. You can get smaller fire extinguishers now that do that to actually deal with lithium fires. It hasn't been applied at large scale in terms of volume. The practice generally is that you allow the cell, which is isolated. So there's isolation within the cell, and there's the cell itself that's isolated. The general method is to stop other cells catching fire. So you'll apply water to cool around the cell while you allow that to actually burn out. Now that period for that burnout may actually be some time. And depending on the wind condition and the materials actually being ejected from the cell, the incident controller would make a determination of who needs to be evacuated depending on where the wind direction is. So the township of Collie is probably unlikely, but the prevailing wind directions are mostly from south to north. So it takes it away from Collie. But at some point in time in the day, it might actually direct to Collie, but that would be a decision of the incident controller. The wind direction at the time, the fire, may not necessarily coincide with the prevailing conditions, but what you'd expect over the time of the life of that fire, the prevailing conditions will probably occur. We'd expect that mostly that smoke is actually going to go out more to the north, not to Collie. But that decision will be made by the incident controller as it appears at the time. So it will be active. Those decisions will be made active in terms of the incident, how long it lasts.
Thank you. Further questions?
A
Yes.
couple of very quick questions for Mr. Hicks, probably. So one of the other submitters or presenters expressed concern about loss of cockatoo habitat. How much habitat would be cleared to accommodate this proposal, if any? And could you just confirm for me that that would be subject to a separate environmental process if that was to occur?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just sort of start back with the beginning of, there was, before there was a proposal even being considered, there was a range of ecological surveys undertaken across the whole site. So that included both flora and vegetation, inclusive of spring survey, and fauna and detailed black cockatoo assessment, so habitat types. And so what that initially led to is the layout as you see it, and what you will note from that layout is there are larger areas of canopy vegetation that the PV array is laid around. Now, as I mentioned, there was a number of reasons why that avoidance approach was taken, because the vegetation in that canopy does provide both foraging and potential breeding habitat for black cockatoos, but also the higher the impact, the higher the additional approval considerations are. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, just trying to avoid clearing within a rural locality. So to your question, what will be the layout of the solar PVs not only has avoided, because that's the larger part of the footprint, has not only avoided those larger sort of canopy connected, or I suppose consistent canopy coverage areas, but there are scattered larger trees throughout the PV array as well. Now, the design has sought to retain those on the basis that they're larger eucalypts that were at the time were perceived to potentially have hollows that could be used for breeding, not known to be used for breeding, but that was from a ground-based inspection. Now, the proponent has undertaken subsequent inspections to confirm the number of those, but where that lands back to your question is to how much of the extent. The extent is the loss of scattered paddock trees, which would still be potential breeding, and also potential foraging habitat. And the quantum has been considered to the extent that, I think your question in relation to other considerations and approvals, and a referral pursuant to EPBC Act is being considered and progressed, but it has the quantum has been deliberately sort of been managed to ensure that that process is a smoother process rather than a more complicated process. And so the quantum is less than, and I just can't remember off the top of my head the exact, but it's we've got in the order of 68 individual scattered paddock trees, I think, of the, which then, and then there you can work out a canopy sort of area off the top of that. But it's that sort of order of magnitude.
Thank you. One more very brief question on noise, please. So noting that there is the acoustic report by Lloyd talks about the fact that it can be contained within noise regs. And the submitters, the residents, were raising concerns noting that about changes to the constant noise they would experience. Can you very briefly respond to that for me, please? What impact would that have, those changes in the constant noise?
So we've got Rob Connolly from our noise consultant, I believe, online. Is it possible to bring him in on this question, please?
Rob's not.
Rob's just joined. Did you catch the question there, Rob?
Yeah, I was allowed back in. Thanks very much for the opportunity. So currently we've allowed for a 5 dB tonality penalty in our predicted noise levels, which may or may not be present. I think it was referred to as a hum by one of the people earlier. So we're also going to install. We can achieve the noise criteria without the need of any sound barriers, or we could also relocate the solar inverters. So in terms of the current noise levels and our predicted noise levels, we show that we meet the assigned noise levels without this tonality present. So we're going to take noise measurements after, and this may not be present.
That answer your question?
Could I just follow up on
maybe only just to add to that as well, for sort of any operation where noise is considered, how operations are factored into that are generally a pretty standard, whether it's hours of operation for a night facility or whatever it may be. The operations which drive noise sources is a fairly standard consideration rather than just assuming that it's a blanket. We'll just run at the noisiest all the time.
Could I just ask the gentleman online what the equivalent, the anticipation, if there is tonal, what's it equivalent to?
So a tonal characteristic would, so the reference to a hum earlier, which was mentioned, would be a low frequency noise, which in this case it wouldn't be, because it's going to be a high frequency fan noise, which is similar. If you equate it to a diesel engine, has a low frequency noise which travels further. If you think of it as a mosquito noise, you only hear when it gets close because it dissipates. So in terms of the likelihood of this tonality being present, it's probably highly unlikely. But in terms of, I suppose, we meet the assigned noise levels without this tonality. So if steps are needed, we can look at that after the noise monitoring.
Okay, so is it something like sort of like a domestic appliance or domestic levels, those sorts of things?
Yeah, it's an annoyance factor. So we've been quite conservative and added this 5 dB tonality to the noise characteristic, which is a penalty which may or may not be present. So without it, we do achieve the noise levels.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Further questions?
I do,
Yes.
just very quickly, please. Goes back to sort of firefighting or other operational things. Again, some of the submitters talked about water contamination to waterways. Do you have a comment on how that's being managed?
Ashwin, I might bring you on this one.
All right. Particularly in the incidents of fire management.
So thank you. So I did touch on this early on, just expand a little bit. So the assets that are prone to fire, could catch fire and have a fuel source are the power transformers in the high voltage area of the facility, as well as the battery. These two asset classes have drainage systems specially designed for this purpose, and this is standard design. That the drainage system, that in the event that a fire occurs and water is sprayed or water comes from active fire suppression systems, it passes through flame traps within the drainage, so that if, in the example of a power transformer failure where the oil might have ignited, there are multiple flame traps in the drainage system, which is in place to put the flames out and to collect the oily water or whatever the contaminant is in this closed drainage system and collect in an evaporation pond outside the facility. This drainage system and the evaporation pond is designed solely for this instance that a fire occurs, there's water sprayed and it's collected. The evaporation pond is over-designed significantly, then it cannot overflow, even taking into account significant rainfall well above what the region.
So it's collected, it goes to an evaporation pond, and
then someone comes and collects the water in the tank and takes it and disposes of it.
And someone is a part of this operational management process.
That's correct. And would only become active if a fire occurs. Then that would trigger the need for someone to come and collect the water and dispose of it.
Okay.
And in addition to that, probably another consideration, and just in relation to waterway risk more generally, you may have be aware from the supporting information, and there has been a quite detailed hydrological assessment to understand, even in quite extreme events, what is the extent of the waterway flood flows, and so all the development is situated well outside of the major event flow as well.
Okay, thank you. Just one other related to condition 2, that might be for Karen. You've suggested some rewording in your submission. Obviously, I think for me, but it looks as though you're seeking some level of certainty around what might be required, although we've heard from the landowners and their representatives that they're not entirely comfortable with screening. So how do we find that meeting point between your rewording here, which is quite specific, related to funding and lengths and heights of screen planting, etc., parallel to the southern boundary of lot 789 versus, you know, thoughts that perhaps that might interrupt their views further or however. How would you go from here with a condition like that to make sure that there's a reasonable solution?
Thank you. The condition is required to be approved. The landscape plan is required to be approved by the Shire of Collie. We have been specifically on this liaising with the Director of Planning in relation to how we would approach it. We felt that this condition probably gave certainty for both parties, that it was, you know, we were being more specific about how we would address that. The other option is that we basically revert back to the way that the condition is worded at the moment, which will still require us to consider the screening. So the only thing I would suggest is that if we could keep in the reference to lot 789, because we have demonstrated, so in terms of the additional information, we have demonstrated that the visual impacts potentially that to be mitigated are from lot 789. The other two lots that we had previously been considering, we have now been able to conclusively confirm that, you know, there's no mitigation required. So if we were looking at a little bit of a hybrid, we'd probably go with what we had previously, but rather than further screened from neighbouring properties, we'd probably look to reference lot 789.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Questions?
All right, thank you very much. Just coming back to bushfire and the condition which requires an amended fire management to satisfy, well, what would you have to do to that to satisfy DFES?
Maybe I'll answer generally, but Anthony, you might have a sort of expanded answer. DFES have given sort of two parts of their submission. So first of all, saying we generally would presume against any increase in risk at all, which is not an unusual DFES position, and then go on to say, however, in circumstances that it is to be approved, these are some considerations. Now, the key thing that they have referenced, which is already referenced in the bushfire management and the response, is the CFA renewable energy facility guidelines. Now, while there have been a range of considerations from those guidelines already factored into the proposal, there are some detailed design elements, particularly in relation to the BESS, that would need to be resolved through detailed design, which is then more about the risk considerations. So, my response, therefore, is it would be further expanding on how those guidelines. Now, while they're and I suppose highlighting as well, they're a reference set of guidelines. When the bushfire management plan was prepared, it acknowledged that they're not specifically applied in Western Australia, but they were used as a guide, given there isn't a specific set or similar guidelines here. That would be what I would suggest is probably the areas where. Now, Anthony, sorry, that was preempting.
Probably the only explicit amendment would be to clarify the perimeter around the solar panels. We have identified that that's basically got a separation space. There may be a requirement to enable or provide comfort that the space around the panels will be traversable.
Right, thank you for that. Just one more question from me, my last one. In the due diligence report, it states that a heritage field assessment and survey of the disturbance footprint will be required, with a recommendation on the following page that I might have missed it, but I couldn't see where that had been undertaken.
Yeah, you're correct. That work has yet to be undertaken. We'll be entering into a Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement that is actually going up for endorsement by the Project Steering Committee today. Following entry into a Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement, we'll engage with the Budja to undertake that survey work. So we'll be undertaking survey work prior to any activities.
Right, thank you. Are there any further questions of the applicants? The applicant? No, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that. We'll move to officers. Ryan Varus Anyone there? Are there any questions of the officers? Sir? Yes, Member Page.
Yeah, could I just check with you, where is your preferred location? We've seen commentary and information about what your local planning strategy and other strategies talk about facilities like these, but in a planning sense, where is your preferred location or zone facilities like this? And what is the current land availability in those preferred locations or zones?
Thank you for your question. At this stage, both the city's planning scheme and our local planning policies haven't gone into specific detail to, I guess, further refine the suitability of land for renewable energy projects. And I guess that is one of the, matters that's, obviously been raised through public submissions in council's consideration and noting of the RAR and just the reading through of the submissions.
Okay. Just in terms of the rural zone, then some of the presenters have challenged your view that the proposal meets the objectives of the rural zone. Would you like to comment on that further?
Yes,
if you would like.
Yes, thank you. Look, in assessing the application in line with the Shire's scheme, planning policies and the state framework, we've found it to be not inconsistent with the objectives of the scheme, and so therefore is capable of being considered for approval. In addressing, I guess, both the matters raised in agency submissions and public submissions, the officers have recommended a number of conditions that we think can manage, mitigate and ensure ongoing compliance with the relevant planning considerations to enable the development to occur.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on the applicant's suggested changes to condition 2?
I guess officers' recommendation in relation to that would probably be to maintain condition 2 as proposed in the RAR report, principally because we think it's important to maintain the ability, in particularly the removal of earth bunds. That may be an effective way to both achieve screening both for visual amenity and for noise amenity. And we think it's important that we actually see the detail of that, and we're able to kind of, I guess, continue to work with the applicant both pre-commencement of development and during construction to ensure that it meets the objective that is, I guess, being trying to be achieved by that condition, particularly given that that area in general has undulating contours, and so it will be somewhat difficult to kind of work out the exact impacts until such time as, I guess, the development has been completed and vegetation that is proposed has had an opportunity to grow, and I guess the types of plants that are, I guess, chosen in terms of maturity and size and location, particularly given that we also need to take into consideration bushfire management issues and feedback from DFES on the final bushfire management plan in relation to the development.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you'd prefer the condition to be worded as it is now, because that gives you scope to move a little bit more within the next 12 months when that plan is due to come forward, to respond to what might actually happen on the site. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. And also noting that post-construction, there is the requirement for them to undertake noise monitoring, and an effective mechanism for controlling that might be the construction of earth bunds. And we think that needs to also be taken into consideration in the context of landscaping and amenity.
Okay. Just a last question from me. Condition 11 requires a Section 70 notification, but there's no timeline stipulated in that condition for when this is to occur. Are you wanting this to happen prior to commencement of operation?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further from me. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Member
If I may go back to that response to condition 2, and I think I heard you mention that you felt there might be the need for earth funding, etc. What is your concern around the applicant's detailing? It's quite specific, and it does reference particular locations. So basically the applicant's rewording provides the detail which is coming from the supplementary visual impact assessment. What are your concerns with the detail of that wording that they've suggested?
At time of drafting the RAR and the conditions, only one visual impact assessment had been fully completed for one property. Obviously, there are other properties that are affected by the development, the Shire hasn't had the opportunity to, appropriately look and assess visual impact assessment reports for all the properties that are going to be affected by the development.
Right, and yet both conditions as they're worded are addressing the supplementary visual impact assessment prepared by Emerge. Are you saying that you haven't had a chance to look at that?
We've only, so the supplementary assessment submitted to the Shire only related to the visual impact assessments associated to one of the properties that had lodged an objection through the public submission process. Supplementary work done by the applicant has been, I guess, post the finalisation of the RAR report.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please.
So how will you then, when you receive this draft landscape plan and you're dealing with the applicant, you've talked about the fact that you don't have supplementary impact for the other properties. Is your expectation that they need to go away and do more of those? Or how are you going to make that determination on behalf of those other properties? Are you going to base it on the preliminary visual impact assessment that was supplied?
No, the intention would be we'd request supplementary information to accompany that landscaping report that would provide amenity assessments across the all affected properties.
Sorry, who would prepare those supplementary assessments?
The applicant.
Is the applicant aware of that requirement?
They're aware that they obviously need to submit a landscaping plan in accordance with the requirements outlined in condition 2.
So just to follow up again from that, are you suggesting that you're not satisfied with the visual impact assessment work that has been done and the information that is presented to us? What more should the applicant be doing?
So not necessarily that we're not satisfied, but we would seek to ensure in terms of approving the final landscaping plan that amenity concerns raised during public submissions have been fully addressed.
All right, thank you.
Just on condition 2, Ryan, the first part of the condition requires the plan to be submitted within 12 months of the date of the approval, but there's no time frame for the planting and or establishment of the landscaping.
So in that regard, presiding member, the Shire or the officers support the recommendation by Urbis to bring that component forward.
Sorry, should we put a time frame in the actual planting of this? So within 12 months following the approval of the plan, or?
The wording, yes, that would be acceptable, presiding member.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions of the officer?
Just have one.
Yes, Member Hyde.
Thank you. Discussion around noise. At the moment, you have condition 13, which you've already referred to, which requires noise monitoring. One of the submitters talked around there being no certainty around the application of the recommendations from the environmental noise assessment prepared by Lloyd George Acoustics. Do you see that additional reference to be necessary, or is it sufficient that condition 13 will deal with it through the noise regulations?
The officers consider that to be sufficient. There's an ongoing statutory compliance for all developments to comply with environmental noise protection regulations. So it's not a specific condition that's required require compliance with a statutory obligation. What that condition will do is provide detailed evidence that the development is indeed, in a real world sense, complying with the state requirements for noise emissions from developments.
Okay, thank you for that. No
No further questions. No further questions. Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. We'll move on now to the item of an RAR with a recommendation for approval and a number of conditions. Seeing if there's a mover and a seconder for the recommendation for approval. Is there a mover for that? Member Hyde, thank you. Is there a seconder? Member Page, thank you. Member Hyde.
Thank you, presiding member. First of all, thank you to everybody who has made submissions and responded to our questions today. That technical input is extremely helpful. Appreciate that. I think we need to consider what's before us today, the specifics of the development and its location, and not be drawn into considering other potential locations. I think specifically we have a development application on the table, and that is the requirement of us to determine whether that is appropriate or not. In doing so, I think that this is consistent with the definition of a renewable energy facility, and certainly a renewable energy facility is an A use in the rural zone. And it has been under the requirement of the A being appropriately advertised, and also from what I've seen further consulted upon beyond the specific public advertising. I've looked at the objectives for the rural zone and they're fairly broad, but I do consider this development to be compatible with them, as it does provide for uses which provide for that diversity and resilience within the rural area, and note that it also meets the relevant performance standards in terms of landscape, setbacks and parking. There doesn't appear to be issues in terms of traffic and transport. Certainly main roads and the Shire engineers have not identified it. It is a relatively low intensity use from that point of view post-construction. I noted the objection from DFES, but having thoroughly explored that aspect of risk and management with the applicant and looking at their technical considerations and also the conditions of approval, I think that the bushfire management plan and also the operational management approach are appropriate in the context of this location and for the scale of the facility. I'm therefore overall comfortable with the location for this use. The visual analysis has demonstrated, in my opinion, that there is limited impact. I do note that since the proposals for lot 789, that there could be impact on their views, but also note that there are conditions of approval which we can rely upon to ensure that some of those impacts are actually mitigated. But I think in that context, we do need to recognise that rural landscapes, and particularly in my opinion, are not static. They don't imply no development. On the contrary, and just checking again, as I was doing on my phone, the approvals and permissibilities within the scheme, there can be things like rural sheds and silos, mining operations and abattoir, resource recovery centres, extractive industry, all of those things potentially within the rural zone. So we can't assume that things are going to be static and that no development will occur. And even farming activities could actually be more visible in certain locations. So I think in that respect, this type of development and the work that the applicant has done has gone a long way to offset and mitigate those visual considerations. The applicant has also offered to work closely with the local government in terms of the landscape plan. I think as well there are positives for this development. Certainly I take into account the economic diversification and resilience, which again is another aim of the scheme and the zone, and do note that the grazing, the rural grazing continues, so that doesn't take the land out of rural production. I'm satisfied in terms of the aspects of flora and fauna, the loss of habitat. Note that there are other processes that may be gone through, and certainly in terms of noise and light spill, I'm satisfied with the technical analysis, and also recognise that beyond the planning framework, again, there are environmental regulations for that. I would, however, suggest an amendment, presiding member, to condition 2, and at this point I would be proposing the applicant's wording in red as they provided in their submission, which includes deletions and conditions to provide specifics and detail. And in addition to that, I would introduce some additional words for the penultimate sentence of this condition, where it reads, the landscaped areas must be planted and established in accordance with the approved landscaping plan, or in accordance with the approved landscaping plan within 12 months of that approval.
Okay, that's there. So that's moved by member Hyde. Is there a seconder for that amendment? Yes, member Page. Thank you. Member Hyde, did you want to make a...
Only very briefly, presiding member, just I think we, through our questioning of the officers, uncovered some uncertainty around what the meaning of the condition as presented in the RAR was. And whilst I think the applicant's wording is very specific, I think that that does give a level of certainty as to what is required and which visual impact assessment this condition does relate to. It is to the satisfaction of the Shire, so there is obviously collaboration required, but I'm more comfortable with providing some clarity and certainty through this additional wording which is proposed.
Page.
Yes, very briefly. I agree with member Hyde on the specificity of the condition. I think it is helpful to be quite specific. In digesting the visual impact assessment information, both the stuff that was provided with the application and then the supplementary visual impact assessment, it appears to me that there will be some visual impact, but it is predominantly on lot 7, 8, 9. So I'm not uncomfortable with this condition referencing only that lot. And I'm not uncomfortable with this change to the condition, given the condition actually reads the landscape plan must be submitted, including that detail. So it doesn't mean it's only that detail. It's obviously open to the Shire and the applicant to discuss impacts on other properties and landscaping. So this doesn't preclude a broader conversation. So happy to support the amendment.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against the amendment? No? Okay. I don't think I need to go back to close the debate on that one. I'll put the amendment. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you.
To close that point for me.
Thank you, presiding member. Look, I will be supporting the recommendation for approval, but before talking to the substantive motion, I'd like to move a series of other minor amendments to conditions. Amendment 2 would be to condition 7, remove reference to the satisfaction of main roads and make it only to the satisfaction of Shire of Collie.
Happy to second.
For that. Yes, thank you.
The reason for that, presiding member, is it is not appropriate for a planning condition to make a requirement to the satisfaction of a third party, even if it was that third party that requested the condition. The Shire of Collie will no doubt engage with Main Roads to determine their views on the crossover design before they make a determination about its suitability.
Is there a speaker against that amendment? No. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Still with you, member.
Thank you. I would then seek to amend condition 11 to require the section 70 notification to be placed on the titles prior to commencement of operation.
What's prior to?
So it would add the wording prior to commencement of operation.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that?
Yes.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, presiding member. The reason for the amendment, it doesn't change the intent of the condition. Currently is our timeline in the condition for completion of this action, and the amended wording provides clarity and certainty for both the applicant and the Shire about when the action is to occur.
A seconder, do you want to? No. Is there any speakers against that amendment? No, I'll put the amendment. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Still with you.
Thank you. And then just a minor amendment to condition 12, which relates to external lighting. And the amendment is to add some wording to require compliance with the standards to the satisfaction of the Shire of Collie.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that, member?
Thank you, presiding member. Again, this doesn't change the intent of the condition, but it just makes it clear and certain who will decide whether compliance has been achieved on implementation and on an ongoing basis with the Australian standard.
Karen, no speakers against? Yes. Okay, I'll put that minor amendment. All in favour? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Still with you.
Thank you, presiding member. Look, ahead of speaking in support of the proposed recommendation, I will that I understand completely the concerns raised by some of the adjoining neighbours, specifically that they have bought land on the basis that they enjoy a certain outlook, and a use is going to be introduced on a neighbouring property that will then change the character of that site. So you've stated you chose to buy and live in the area because of the peaceful rural amenity and the beautiful outlook. So I understand your concerns. I think they are valid. Picking up on Member Hyde's point, though, the nature of the rural zone in a planning sense is not just open paddocks. There are other stuff that comes into play with that. So it does open the potential for other uses to be developed on rural land, and this is one of them. I think the applicant has provided quite strong and clear justification as to why development like this is quite well suited for the rural zone, including availability of large tracts of land, access to sunlight, the ability to co-locate with existing agricultural uses and not necessarily stop those, and the preservation of industrial land for more intense industrial purposes. And I guess this is why there is an emerging prominence of these types of uses in the rural zone across the state and indeed in this general area. In terms of other concerns raised by the neighbours, the acoustic report does show that, and that's what we have to work with, does show that noise that will emanate from the development can be kept below the required levels of the noise regulations. I'm also heartened by the inclusion of a condition, and it's not normally included on developments, that a noise assessment of operations 12 months later gets done, and that mitigation measures can then be employed should there be any exceedance of the noise regs. And that's not normally included in the planning approval. So I'm heartened to see that that is just an added safeguard for the residents if there are indeed other noise issues that arise. I am satisfied through the questioning, reading the report, but also through the questioning today, that concerns about bushfire risk and management have also been adequately addressed. The bushfire management plan deals with several strategies to manage risks, as the bushfire consultant advised, both from external bushfires and potential internal ignition. And I note that the plan is designed to cater for worst case scenarios. And I note the condition has been recommended to update the plan to address the issues raised by DFIS. For me, this leaves the key issue of visual amenity impacts on adjoining neighbours, and noting the findings of the supplementary visual impact, which was prepared specifically to respond to the issues that the neighbours raised. The information suggests that the proposed development will not be highly visible from the dwelling on lot 774, if at all, because of existing dense vegetation on that site and the setback distance of that existing dwelling. The information suggests there may be glimpses of the PVs from the existing dwelling on lot 771 through the existing vegetation and along the waterway, but they aren't expected to be highly visible or visible en masse, and are not anticipated to significantly impact the viewing experience from this property. So therefore, in relation to lot 79, the development will be highly visible, and we saw that from some of the photo montages from certain areas, but less so from others. I'm pleased to see those photo montages were prepared so that we could actually get an indication of what it will look like once the planting has occurred. Now, those mitigation measures may not be to the satisfaction of the neighbours who currently enjoy the outlook in its current form, but I think the new landscape outlook is intended to still be one of a peaceful rural nature and will enable the operation of a much needed renewable energy facility, which aligns with all relevant underlying strategic planning documentation and frameworks. It'll allow it to largely operate in harmony with the rural setting and hopefully be as respectful as possible to the existing neighbours. So happy to support on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Page. Speaker against? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member. Ian Miffling from the Shire of Collie. I preface my comments by the fact that I'm not a town planner and I'm not a lawyer. However, I'm going to make my comments in the context that I have read and I've heard about the just transition process and how this proposal would fit within the state's ambition to transmit to renewable energies, and I appreciate that. However, my position here today is to represent my community, my shire, and speak about this matter as I see it affecting our community. The first point that I want to make a comment about is on the rural land and the scale of this project. I accept that the land is zoned rural and the proposed development is permitted as an A use. However, in my view, it should not be automatic that approval is granted. The A use is to allow for consideration of all other factors, as well as the proposal that we have before us. The land is at the moment viable agricultural land, and it lends itself to other potential rural uses, agricultural uses in the future. And I believe that the scale of this proposed development, by its virtue, size and land coverage, negates the rural aspect totally. Once it's put there, there may be supplementary grazing, but it doesn't allow for any future agricultural pursuits of some perhaps smaller nature. It really does, in fact, in my opinion, become an industrial site. And I would consider that that is beyond what could be considered a rural A use, particularly in our community. And I think they are incompatible land uses. I do acknowledge that there are existing developments of this type, but they are on the south side of Williams Road. They're not on this property. And they are, you know, the battery storage, the switchyard, the Coolangatta Industrial Estate and the power stations. But they are in an area that has been recognised, I guess, as a continuation of some industrial strip. But I don't think that this proposal should be extended across the other side of the road into what we do currently have as an agricultural open space. I'd like to talk about the amenity. I think the visual impact of such this facility is not something that the adjoining landowners should have to endure, and endure for a very long time, I might say. It is not acceptable to me or to my community that existing dwellings should be sited in some place just to prevent a visual impact from this proposal. People should be entitled within their property to put their dwelling wherever they wish to put it, as long as it's within the building codes and the rest of it. So I don't think it's reasonable to ask people to be moving around on their property to satisfy some project that wants to come forward. I think that the proposal for planting of vegetation, and I've seen that additional condition 2, this takes a while we're talking about mature vegetation eventually, but there is a time leading up to maturity that the people are still going to have this visual impact. So I think that is an issue for me. And the visual impact is not just from where the dwelling might be sited. To me, it is from any point within those people's legal property, and I don't think they should be impacted by that. I just want to mention about noise. In my opinion, the proposal talks about 80 dB at evening and perhaps down to 50 dB at night. It's still an impact. I mean, that's a proposal to try and mitigate the noise. It doesn't eliminate the noise. And I think that in a quiet rural environment, any noise becomes a constant. And a constant hum at any level would be an annoyance during the life of this project. And once the project is established, it would be very difficult to reverse that noise nuisance. And we have evidence of this here in Collie from past industrial type developments. There would be a neighbour facility ongoing conflict. And I think it's all very well to talk about the noise regulations and the remedies that might be applicable under those regulations. However, I do note, and I made comment or asked the question earlier about the ongoing employment. There will be nobody here in Collie. How does this get dealt with? Do people just pick up a phone and get to the other end and somebody remotely is going to talk about how they might mitigate any noise nuisance? I don't think that's a practical solution. It is an issue. We've had issues of that type ongoing here in this town, and I could see that this could be another one of those. So where would those noise complaints be directed to? I don't think it's incumbent to just put it back. If the people can't get in touch with the proponents, with the developers, then it comes back to the local government. And I think that that's just not right. So I think that is an issue as far as I'm concerned. I think the fire risk, the batteries catching on fire. Okay, I've heard that and I've read that we let them burn. I don't think that is satisfactory. This site, this property is within closer proximity to the state forest and the surrounding properties from the owners that we've heard from today. Any of the properties south of the Williams Road is not in the same proximity to the state forest as what this is. So I think that there is potential there for this fire. It's all very well to say let a battery just burn out, but if there's any debris on the ground and that could potentially catch fire, then the sparks and the whatever that comes from that is very quickly transmitted into the state forest and into the adjoining properties. And I don't think that that's a risk that this community or the adjoining landowners should be subjected to. There is no firefighting facility out in that area. If the local bushfire brigades were required to attend, who knows the availability of them? I think there's a risk there. Are these people trained to be able to deal with battery fires? I don't know that. And there's no indication to me in any of the reports that that would even happen. So I think that that is just not an acceptable proposition from my point of view, and I think from our community's point of view. And I think there is the noted fact that there would be an increased fire risk to the habitat, and we've heard about, you know, the cockatoos and the wildlife in that area, and I think there would be an increased risk to those. And I think there are other impacts as well. They may not be all in the strict planning sense, and I did mention that I'm not a town planner, so I hope, Mr. Presiding Member, you can indulge me in that respect. But I think just generally there are the environmental impacts and the adjacent waterways and creeks. Now, it might be sufficient to say that they won't be impacted, but we don't know that they won't be impacted. And I think it's a risk too much to take. I mean, Collie is a water catchment area. All of the water that comes down ends up in our river system. We're in the Wellington Dam catchment area. And I think anything that could have the potential to increase the risk to our water supply is just not worth that risk. And I think that that is a consideration that we need to have. And I read in one of the submissions from one of the adjoining landowners about the impact it could have on their insurance on their properties. And I think that is a real concern. I mean, already we have in this community, and I know other communities, where insurance impacts where people are near riverways and waterways where there is potential for flood. And we have that here in Collie. These people may well have an impact on them. We don't know that. It's not demonstrated in any way, but it could be. And I think that's a concern. I've mentioned about the economic spin-off. There is no economic spin-off from this project for Collie. We've heard that it's in the state interest. The state interest is one thing. The interest of Collie is another thing. In terms of our local government, the just transition process is about providing job opportunities through new industry for our community. This does not provide any job opportunity ongoing. It may provide job opportunities in the construction phase, it may not. But once that's done, it's all gone. It does nothing more for our community. So I note that with concern. And I think aesthetically, I just don't think this fits. I think it's going to be quite large on the landscape. I accept that it doesn't have any traffic impacts, and I think that that's reasonable. The Williams Road would not be impacted at all. So for those reasons, Mr. Presiding Member, I'm opposed to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mifflin. Councillor Italiano, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Presiding Chair. Like Councillor Mifflin, I don't have any town planning expertise other than what I've picked up on the local government body here during my 10 years of service. However, I will also be voting against. I'll try and be quite succinct in my reasons for it, as Councillor Mifflin has covered the matter quite well, I believe. One of the reasons I'm against it is that, as per Local Planning Scheme 6, the development doesn't enhance the local character or environment. Also, according to our local planning strategy, renewable energy products are discretionary within rural areas, so we can use that discretion to deny this application just as much as we can use that discretion to support it. Collie already has a shortage of rural land. So quarantining more rural land for projects like this one, and particularly this one, could result in someone who is going through the just transition that this town is currently going through, looking to leave the mining industry or the power generation industry and go into farming, running some sheep or whatever on properties like this. This is quarantining land that those people who are undergoing that just transition will be denied. There are others, but not a lot of other properties like this in this Shire. And I did question one of these proponents earlier regarding the Coolangatta estate and the investigations they'd made in relation to that piece of land. I'd also point out that we have the Shotts Industrial Estate here, or the Shotts Industrial Park, that's been sitting idle for the best part of 30 years. There is nothing happening at the Shotts Industrial Park. It is located very, very close to power stations, coal mining and infrastructure, but nothing's happened there. And I believe that if the state was fair dinkum in its intention to get these sort of projects moving, it would be encouraging proponents to go to these areas. And, you know, Shotts Industrial Park, as I say, there is nothing there now except a sign, and that is basically all that's been there for a long, long, long time. The size of this project also, relative to the size of the block it's on, is very large. So moving it or parts of it away from neighbours would be very, very difficult, as it's all located on the northern side of Williams Road, not on the other part of the property owned by this proponent. I'd also like to comment on fire and fire risks. One of the speakers for the proponent said something along the lines that the prevailing winds in Collie are westerlies. I support that, they are westerlies. The problem that hasn't been identified by the proponents is that in Collie, fire risk is elevated not when we're having westerlies, it's in summertime when the winds come from the east. After living here for 7 decades, I can tell you that fires in Collie don't generally occur when the fire's from the west. They're more common when the fire is from the east, and that is during the fire season. So they are my reasons for voting against it. Again, I concur with Councillor Mifflin. We look at this as a local thing. We look at it as something that is either good for our town or bad for our town. And we have an obligation to the people in this Shire to look after their interests. So I'd like you to bear that in mind. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Italiano. Look, I fully respect the views presented by both councillors today. They are endeavouring to represent the local community. However, our task is to deal with this application before us with the scheme and any other policy provisions that we need to apply. And if as Councillor Mifflin said, it was about open space and keeping open space, then an A use like this could never be approved in the rural zone. I don't think that's what was meant by the scheme when a use like this was given designation as an A use. So from my point of view, it can be approved. It's consistent, in my opinion, with the Shire's local planning strategy and and importantly with the WA Planning Commission position statement on renewable energy facilities. I won't go into great detail as we've heard a lot from both the mover and seconder on this. I note the submissions received from the and while issues like bushfire risk, noise, lighting were raised, it seemed to me that one of the main issues was the visual impact. And while this is a real consideration in determining the application, it's not clear to me that the views referred to could be considered as significant views on a strategic basis. I know that they're important views for themselves, but the local planning strategy doesn't identify views of significance, doesn't give us any, I suppose, guidance in that way. So I have to accept that this use can be mitigated, or that the visual is mitigated through the use of landscaping and earth bungs. In conversely, actually, the applicant has examined and presented the visual impact to us. And that assessment, in my view, satisfies my of the likely impact. I'm not saying there's no impact, but I think it can be mitigated. I'm satisfied that the application or the development through those conditions can satisfy those concerns that have been raised. So from my point of view, I'm happy to support the proposal. And back to the mover.
Thank you. Just
Hyde, sorry.
Just to close, presiding member, thank all the speakers. That's well considered and well articulated contributions, and thank the local government members for their points. I still, however, reiterate that this is contemplated in the local Shire planning framework at a strategic and a statutory level. I agree that an A use is not automatic. Discretion needs to be applied. There has been considerable technical documentation to support and manage mitigation and the corresponding conditions. It is clearly still compatible with rural activity given that the sheep grazing can continue. So despite listening to those arguments against and understanding the submitters' concerns, I believe that what is before us can be approved, complete with the conditions of approval as we have amended them, and I'm happy to apply discretion in support of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now put the motion as amended. All in favour? Against? Carried 3-2. Thank you. Moving on, just to wind up the meeting, there's no Form 2 applications, no section 31 reconsiderations, and in section 3 there are a number of stat matters listed there. I close the meeting at 11:47. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Thank you to the presenters and staff here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Member, for the opportunity from Collie to present.
Thank you.